This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are stemmed. Stay with us. Welcome to this program, Dr. Awal. And Dr. Awal Alo is a well-known scholar, academician, and researcher. Today we'll be discussing on the current political situation of Ethiopia and Oromia, the existing political and economic as well as diplomatic position of the country, and we'll have some suggestion to get out of the current crisis of the country in general terms. Dr. Awal, I see that the problem of Ethiopia did emerge from a web of complicated factors, and I believe that among others, the question for democracy, good governance, autonomy, and the right of nations and nationalities have been there for a long period of time. And in 1995, a new constitution was primed for change, and there were some attempts to respond to the questions of nations and nationalities, questions of democracy, good governance, and as a result, different regional states were created. Issues of language, issues of equality and justice were stated. Nevertheless, much did not come out of it. In actual terms, it was not implemented. And a new struggle, some call it mass movement, the others call youth movement, was started, took from 2014 to 2018. And in 2018, the political landscape of Ethiopia was changed. There were hopes, and quite a number of promises were made for change and transformation. I believe that those hopes and promises were hijacked. Now we are at the stage of turbulence in that country. So before going into the effect of those things, like the effect of this war and turmoils on political, economic, and diplomatic situations, I would like to pose a question for you, the same question. And that question is, how do you see the current political situation of Ethiopia and Oromia, given your background and rich experience?
Thank you very much for having me on your program. These are very important questions, and I think it's also very important to not only focus on the present, but also go back, I think take a longer view of history and some of the structural factors that lead to the current predicament. So you're absolutely right that this is a country with a very complex past, with a very complex history, with asymmetric relationship of power between the various ethnic groups that make up the Ethiopian state. Is also a country with a history of empire. And it's really important to understand the imperial nature of the Ethiopian state and the logic of exclusion and marginalization on the base of which Ethiopia is built, and how that foundational logic continued to inform and animate the ways Ethiopian sovereignty expressed itself in terms of the various relationships that it had with the various people in that country. So when you look at, for example, the way the central government acts towards Oromia or towards Tigray or towards Benishangul, other parts of the country, it's important to understand that the reason why the central government acts in the way it acts is usually because of that history of empire and the ways in which the country has been constituted. Now, you're absolutely right that there have been various struggles in that country for the right to self-determination, for inclusive governance, for cultural autonomy, for linguistic rights, and so on and so forth. But these rights have not been properly articulated in constitutional terms. Even when they were to some extent recognized constitutionally, the enforcement has been extremely weak. And as a result of those promises that have been made but never upheld, we now find ourselves in this predicament. And I think the reason why the country has been such a scene of utter devastation and just total tragedy is precisely because the government failed. Now, when we talk about government, it's really easy in most cases to kind of, pinpoint single individuals, but I think sometimes it's larger than individuals. It's a cultural problem, it's a political problem, and I think it's a failure of collective imagination of the people who make up that country. But of course, when we talk about the reasons why certain things fail, it's important that we hold individuals accountable. It's important that we apportion blame to key individuals. But I think sometimes it's also important, if we are looking for a solution, it's important to actually look beyond individuals, because these individuals are simply symptoms. They are not necessarily the causes of some of these complex tragedies that we have been going through.
Thanks so much, Dr. Awal. And with that, we'll be discussing on the current political, economic, and diplomatic situation of the country. And as you said, there have been inclusions, exclusions, and a number of problems in that country. And in my evaluation, the political situation of Ethiopia is getting worse than before. And there are threats and security challenges here and there. War, killings, and mass arrest, instability, and intimidations are everywhere now. Hate speech, mass killings are getting common. Having peace and stability is turned to be a daunting challenge for that matter. And in terms of economy, as you can observe, the production possibility curve of the nation is shrinking badly, and inflation is at its highest peak, harming people perhaps as an armed robbery. Life is getting tough for citizens. Worsening the situation, corruption is everywhere throughout the country, and drought, famine is prevailing in many parts of the country. And as you can observe, in terms of diplomacy, the situation seems unrepairable in the short run. And I would like to get your reflection on this and other issues. So in general terms, how do you evaluate the political, economic, and diplomatic position of the country at this stage?
In terms of the political, social, and cultural crisis the country is facing at the moment, I think it is reasonable to say that this is extraordinary and unprecedented. At least I don't think we have seen anything of this scale over the course of the last 30 years at least. Now, there has been a lot of discussion in terms of how the country came to this point. There are so many structural blunders that the current government has made. And, the other parties in the country, I don't think they have done enough in terms of stopping the government, or in terms of at least finding a way to resolve the crisis. But the largest share of the blame, the responsibility for mitigating the crisis or for averting the crisis falls on the government. So the totally avoidable, the pointless what the country got into, has led to a military crisis, to a security crisis. It led to a political crisis, which then, of course, had implication on the economic conditions in the country, and also on the social relationship, the social cohesion in the country. So just to kind of pick on each of those 3 points, the political, the social, and the economic. From a political point of view, I think we have reached a point where it is becoming a lot more easier to imagine the fragmentation of Ethiopia than, for example, the possibility of Ethiopia coexisting and creating a country that works for everyone who makes up the Ethiopian state. I'm not saying that is the kind of outcome that I want, or the kind of outcome that is inevitable, but it is really likely that Ethiopia may not continue as a kind of united, cohesive state going forward. So, I think that should tell you everything that you need to know about the political crisis. And of course, we're talking about humanitarian crisis, both in Oromia and Tigray. We're talking about an ongoing armed conflict with significant harassment and dehumanization of the population in these regions. Of course, in the Amhara regional state, you have significant tension between the federal government and armed groups there. So, it can't get worse. right? And it's all of these factors that came together have pushed the country to the edge. And we're now looking at the abyss. We're talking about the possibility of Ethiopia fragmenting. Okay, so in terms of the political crisis, I think that is the level and the kind of the scope that we are looking at. From a social point of view, I think regardless of the asymmetric relationship of power that existed between the various groups in the country, and also in terms of ethnicity and in terms of religion, what we saw during this war is a significant intensification of polarization of the public realm and public discourse. This space has been polarized, particularly the last 10 or so years, but since this war started, literally the country become insane. Insanity essentially reigned, and people that we thought were normal and reasonable, rational, became extremely unreasonable and irrational. And I think that is, very much the effect of the political differences, the violence that grips the country, and of course, the risk that various communities have been facing, and everybody was, feeling a significant threat, some existential threat. Some were facing a threat to what they considered to be, their preferred vision for the Ethiopian state. But there was a significant intensification, hate in the political discourse, deepening polarization that ultimately led to really a rupturing of the social fabric that existed among people of various creeds and people of various ethnicities. So, it would take decades to repair those social fabrics that are essential in terms of leading a life of meaning and significance in any society. And of course, the political side of issues have to improve in order for the social side of issues to improve. So those are very much tied to one another. The political dimension of the problem also had significant implication for the economy. So the country, already a very poor country, largely depended on foreign aid, very limited export. And of course, you also had the COVID pandemic that significantly threatened the economic activity across the world. So the combination of all of these has led to a very threatening economic situation in the country, where it's almost impossible now for families to afford the bread in the country, with a huge amount of inflation, declining foreign currency reserve, basically an economy in free fall. That is what we're looking at right now. So it is a combination of all of these factors that creates this apocalyptic image of a country that is probably falling apart very soon.
Thank you, Dr. Awal. And I think you did focus on the possibility of fragmentation of that country, polarization between different actors, and you have shown us the link between the political and the economic conditions of the country. Perhaps you will get time to touch upon the diplomatic relation of the country. And okay, given this situation, I think it's important to think how the country should get out of this kind of crisis in general, and Oromia in particular. And personally, I believe that the only solution for the current crisis of Ethiopia is political, not military, as far as I'm concerned. I believe that there should be a true national dialogue, that moves the country out of this crisis, and perhaps create a landscape for political transformation. And as you know, war is everywhere throughout the country, including Oromia. So the first important thing is ceasefire, which should be followed by an inclusive, participatory, perhaps transparent facilitated by trusted and perhaps independent actors. And I guess there should be political will and public buy-in in this regard. And from your side, what do you think is a possible solution to come out of this crisis, both at the national level and regional level, for that matter?
Yeah, I think as far as the way forward is concerned, there has been a lot of discussions, a lot of debates, a lot of contributions that have been made by various actors, Ethiopians, foreigners, governments, non-governmental organizations. And the one consistent theme that emerged as part of this range of discussions and debates about Ethiopia's future is the need for a national dialogue. And I think some of us have been calling for a national dialogue even before the war in Tigray started, because the structural realities in the country, the differences in terms of visions for the future, means that the only way Ethiopia could move forward as of April 2018, when the current government came to power, was by promoting national reconciliation and creating or building some kind of national consensus that could bring the various actors, various elites together. That did not happen. As a result of that, the country went into war in various parts of the country. It started in OROMIA, then to Tigray. That also kind of changed the various alignments that existed in the country. But in any event, if Ethiopia has chosen the paths of negotiation, dialogue, and discussion, we could have avoided some of the most brutal aspects of the conflict that's ongoing now. Now, again, I think the way forward is negotiation, dialogue. That is the only way you could solve this country's problem. This is not rocket science. It does not require some kind of magical formula of a scientific nature. The only way you can solve differences among the various nations in that country is through dialogue. Dialogue is going to be very difficult. It's going to be very painful. It's going to be very inconvenient, because we are not beginning this discussion from here, from today. We go back in history. We talk about the various relationships that existed among the various groups. There is a settling of accounts as part of that discussion, rhetorically, in terms of who did what happened to who. But it is important that this happens. Anybody who cares about the Ethiopian state, or who cares about people in general, have to accept the fact that this is necessary. This is indispensable. Without dialogue, without discussion, you cannot move this country forward. It's possible that for a short period of time, you could muzzle opposition, you could, lock people behind bars, sometimes start small wars, win wars, sometimes creates various political realities on the ground and makes it possible to go on for a year, 2 or 3, even 5, even maybe 10. But ultimately, in the final analysis, you have to come back to this question of how is the Ethiopian state constituted historically? How is it created? Who are the various groups who have a voice in this country today? And how do we create a country that works for all of us, a country that embraces identities, cultures, and languages of those who are pushed to the margin, existed at the subterranean level for decades? Those questions are important. And I understand, of course, the government has announced a national dialogue program. A lot of us have said that this national dialogue program needs to be inclusive, that it needs to be credible, that it needs to be comprehensive. At least from what the government is saying so far, and in terms of the various actors that are not included so far, I can't see how a credible dialogue could take place. I can't see how a comprehensive dialogue could take place. When we talk about dialogue, we're not just talking about a negotiation to complete or to settle the differences between the various fighting groups. Dialogue should also be focused on long-term structural issues about the future of the Ethiopian state. what kind of country do we want to have as people? If you ask different Ethiopians have different answers to this question. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with people having different views about having, country that is, federal, presidential, parliamentary, unitary, and so on and so forth. But that decision must emerge out of a negotiated process that includes everyone. It doesn't mean that everyone will get what they wanted, but at least to have a country and a constitutional system that is anchored in the will of the people is something that any Democrat should be proud of, even if it does not reflect my view. So, to very directly respond, to respond to your question, what we need is dialogue. And this dialogue needs to be credible. It needs to be inclusive. When we say inclusive, it needs to be inclusive of all the various stakeholders that exist in that country. Yeah. Now, the government, for example, is saying that armed groups, some armed groups should not or will not be allowed to participate in the national dialogue process. But obviously, if you are beginning an important, very significant process of this scale by excluding some of the most important political actors who are making it impossible in the country for the government to govern, then of course that is a self-defeating exercise. You are sabotaging yourself if you actually meant to have a national dialogue process. So ultimately, whatever the government or various actors do, Ethiopia can only be moved forward if there is a genuine conversation among its elites, its various actors on its future.
Nice reflection, really. As you said, a true national dialogue is not an option. It's a necessity, and people can have different views, but they need to sit down, discuss, and solve problems politically instead of rushing to war. And we have seen the result of war over the past 2 years. It's totally destruction in terms of politics, in terms of economy, in terms of diplomacy. I agree with that. And let me take you back to the 2018 situation. You may slightly touch upon that. During 2018, there were hopes and there were promises for change and transformation. But that hope and transformation, I guess, was hijacked and nothing has happened and we moved to the wrong direction. How do you evaluate this thing? And do we have any reason for that, or do you have any justification why the government or different actors immersed themselves into this kind of situation?
Well, we can all really speculate as to why the government has chosen the position, that the direction that it has chosen. It's there were moments when I had certainty and clarity in terms of this question of why did, for example, the prime minister, who enjoyed a huge amount of support at the time, decided to go in a direction that leads to actually nowhere. It's not like this is not pointed out. A lot of us have said consistently over and over again that returning Ethiopia to a unitarist path would lead to nowhere. It will only send us back to the path of violence and destruction. And I have personally made that point on several occasions back in 2019 when the then party EPRDF was dissolved and the Prosperity Party was established in its place. When that institutional shift was brought into being, we know that it wasn't simply about changing a political party. There is also a very clear ideological signaling alongside what the government was doing at the time. So it was quite foreseeable that this country would go down the path of destruction. So the question is, why did the Prime Minister chose, and his party, his government chose to go the path that they went? I think there could be several factors, but I don't think any one of us would know, the exact reason. And I don't think the government itself actually knows the exact reasons, because people don't actually sit down in one place and decide on these things. One thing leads to another thing leads to the other. You are dealing with various actors, both internal and external. Before you know it, you are in a collusion course. And I think that's what happened in Ethiopia. It's not clear to me to what extent, for example, the Prime Minister is committed to, the One Ethiopia project. Is he really committed to the One Ethiopia project?
Yes, literally there were two camps, like the Federalist bloc and the unitary camp. Those who advocate the golden days, they call it the golden days of Ethiopia, and they want to return to that. And the other bloc is like promoting true federalism, democracy, and nations and nationalities living together. And you can slightly touch upon that, yes.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, that is very clear that there were two camps, and historically, there existed two camps. The question I'm asking here is whether Abiy Ahmed is actually very genuinely committed to the unitarist idea, or whether he actually saw that as an important device to consolidate power in Ethiopia. That is the question I'm asking. Of course, from the very start, he took a very centrist line, a very unitarian line. He has done a lot in terms of, unearthing this, old historical relics, old, kings, and giving them a place in the palace and so on and so forth. He has done a lot in terms of re-energizing that base. There's no question about that. But I still wonder whether he actually very genuinely believed in that project, in the continuity of Milik's project, or whether he is simply came to the conclusion that the best way he can actually consolidate power and secure his position is by pursuing that project, by pursuing that agenda. I don't think any one of us actually clearly know the answer to that. I don't think. I mean, I myself have said in the past that he is committed to the project, right? And I have written about this. But I sometimes question to what extent he is actually committed. Yeah. So that is, one question for me, and obviously he moved in that direction, postponed the election, and that put him on a collusion course with the Tigrayans. And I think at that point, the Prime Minister was under pressure from the Amharas and from Isaias. Maybe he felt that the only way he could actually govern this country is by, forcefully getting into Tigray and removing TPLF. Because when you think about it, if the Ethiopian forces march from the south, Eritrea from the north, of course, the Amharas would do everything they can, because, if you remember, in September, October, there were very intense talks about decimating the OLF and the TPLF by the Amhara people, and there were even documents that were circulated. And of course, so if you have that kind of support from Eritrea and Amhara forces, and of course there is also, I think, a promise by Western, by what we call this middle powers, such as the UAE, that they would provide aerial support. It may be possible that I think the Prime Minister somewhat found himself in that territory where he had no option but to go to war. Again, none of us could speak about this with certainty. I say this because I find it incredible that someone like him, who had that level of support, right, would essentially, destroy the country, destroy his reputation, bring all that disaster to the people in that country. So I guess it's a question that we could never answer with certainty, but it is possible that without serious thinking, without serious policy, without serious strategy, you're dealing with various actors piecemeal, ad hoc, in different ways, and then that kind of leads you down the path of a major destructive war, such as the one that we found ourselves in. And at that point, really, you have reached a point of no return, and just have to win the war. But of course, the government did not win the war, and that's why now we have a rethinking, a discussion about, possibly a different path, national dialogue, negotiation. I don't think these things would have happened had it not been for the ways in which the war has unfolded.
If you look at the current situation of Ethiopia, it seems that the problem is going beyond its boundary. As you clearly indicated, Eritrea is there, Somalia is there, and some other countries are also there, interfering into the calculation of what's going on. And profoundly thank you to discuss with me, and finally I will give you a kind of opportunity whereby you can make closing remark by touching upon whatever you like.
Yeah, I think if there is anything that I would like to say is emphasizing once again the need to choose peace over violence and conflict. And I say this because what war does is basically create this hole, right? A hole, a very painful hole that is very difficult to feel. That's very difficult, a pain that is very difficult to heal. When you go into war, it's not just combatants fighting, it is the entire country that is at war with one another. And it's very difficult to heal the social fabric. It's very difficult to regain trust. It's very difficult for people to believe in the future of that country, whatever form the country takes in the future. And there is really very few instances in the world where war and armed conflict actually solve the political problem. Ultimately, whether it takes a decade or two or more, you have to come back and have a political solution. In our case, one of the things that we have seen is that this country has been basically fighting the same war for the last 50 years. The war that the various armed national liberation movements have been fighting against the Derg, the war that during EPRDF, the OLF and ONLF have been fighting, the war that is being fought today, it's precisely the same war. What good reason do you have to believe that your war is going to end this long-standing political demands and political questions that has been around for a very long time? Absolutely no reason. So even at this late hour, although I think we have destroyed ourselves, even at this late hour, it's important that we choose the path of peace. Only through peace can Ethiopia go forward. Only through peace can the various groups in this country can come together and live a life of peace and harmony. Whether people chose to live together or decide to go their own separate ways, the only way this should be done or could be done is through a peaceful means. So my message is peace, peace, peace.
This is OROMIA11. The program is the future of Africa. This program focuses on the future of the Horn of Africa. It is political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. It's a platform whereby we can share our vision, hope, and professional critics. All views are esteemed. Dr. Awal, profoundly thank you for coming and discussing with me. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
With this, we conclude our discussion today with Dr. Awal Alo on the current political, economic, and diplomatic situation of Ethiopia and Oromia. For those of you who like to share your vision, hope, and professional critics, the door is open. Please contact me through my Facebook. My name is Dr. Hussein Kadir. See you next time. This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are esteemed. Stay with us.